Hey guys, I'm really excited about the conversation this weekend and your conversation in your group. When I first started preaching the gospel, somebody said, why are you going into ministry? I was going to be a medical doctor. That's why I wanted to go to med school. When Jesus changed me and set my life on fire, I wanted other people to have the same experience I had. And they asked me, what are you going to do? And how do you phrase that? I mean, what's your goal? I said, I want to be a dealer in hope. That's what I want to be. I grew up in a poverty situation, very limited access to education, a dysfunctional family. And when I met Christ, it changed all of that. And I just had this sense of hope and value that I'd never had before. And I wanted other people to have that hope. So early on, I said I was a dealer in hope. So anytime I have the ability to have a conversation about hope, that is a vein in my life. I could spend the next several weeks just talking about hope and how hope calibrated Daniel's life and how it calibrated Paul's life. And we could look through the stories on and on of people who suffered. I mean, you look at the story of the book of Revelation. The Apostle Peter wrote to the suffering, and he references hope in his writings to the suffering. And then John the Revelator was trying to, the ruler after Nero was more wicked than Nero, and he was the one alive in John the Revelator's day. And so John needed this revelation from Jesus, this verbal revelation from Jesus that he was the one, the Alpha, the Omega, to come to set all things straight. John was banished on the island of Patmos. Life was hopeless. But the message of Revelation was, we win. And I know people get caught up in the symbolic and literature and the figurative, and they're always wanting to ask me who this is and what that is. And Revelation is hard to gather. But the main point of the book of Revelation is that we win. And I want to encourage you today, as you're studying and talking about the life of Daniel and how this eternal hope calibrated and organized his entire life, think through verses that I just referred to, Hebrews chapter 6. I mean, there are references. When you get down to about verse 18 of Hebrews chapter 6, it starts talking about God gave us a promise and an oath, two trustworthy sayings. Just like he did Abraham. He gave Abraham a promise in Genesis 15, and Abraham lost heart. So he comes back along in Genesis 22 and makes an oath on top of the promise. Now, God doesn't have to do that. His word is enough. But graciously, he gave a promise and an oath, and he's done the same thing to us. Two unchangeable things, the writer of Hebrews says. We have a promise and an oath, and these are a trustworthy anchor for our souls. And when you read that, it references thus casting the anchor out before us. And you've heard me, if you've been around long, you've heard me talk about the principle of kedging. That's what the writer is referring to in Hebrews chapter 6. Because you don't normally cast an anchor in front of you. You drop an anchor to hold your position. But the writer of Hebrews, at the end of chapter 6, talks about casting an anchor before us. And then later on it says that Jesus has gone before us into the veil, behind the veil where the priest went, and he's dropped our anchor there. He's gone before us. So the principle of kedging is where sailors would take the boats. They didn't have all the mechanical things that we have on our boat, so they would actually manually put the large anchors to the ship, row out into the water when the winds were pushing the boat against the rocks in the harbor, and they had to get away. But all they had was sails. They didn't have motors. So the only way to get away from the bank and keep from being dashed against the rocks was to kedge. They would take the anchor and they would go out before them in the boats, the small boats. They would drop them, and then they would tighten the anchor, and they would pull themselves. They would kedge themselves away from the rock towards the open water to keep from dashing against the rocks, losing everything. Paul is making a reference to that practice in Hebrews chapter 6 when he talks about the anchor that is cast before us, when he talks about Jesus going before us behind the veil. Literally, it is a strong and trustworthy anchor. And so I just want you to know that as you talk about your own present circumstances, the way our country, our world is looking more and more like Babylon every day and how we're going to stand, I want you to kedge against the hope. You have anchored your life in Jesus. He has dropped your eternal anchor behind the veil in the presence of God. He has gone before you. That hope ought to calibrate your life. There is absolutely nothing that is going to come your way in this life. I mean, we could talk about a lot of things that are going to turn our lives upside down, but there's absolutely nothing that's going to come your way that can cut the cord, that can cause you to lose the hope that is there for you. Kedge your way against the headwinds that you're facing because your Savior has dropped your anchor in heaven. And I'm not going to take a lot of time right now, but I just encourage you, talk about the two things that kill hope. The myopia and amnesia. Myopia is nearsightedness. If you read Psalm 73, there is Asaph was one of the psalmists other than David. He wrote Psalm 73, and you see Asaph, if you read Psalm 73, he was blinded by the current situations. He lost his eternal perspective, and he let nearsightedness, what was going on in his life, cause him to lose the hope that was in the promises of God. He knew what God said, but there are things in our lives when what we say we believe and what we actually believe are not the same. We say we have our hope anchored in Jesus, but when the election doesn't go the way we want it to, or there's some crisis on the scenes, or the world is falling apart, going to hell in a handbasket, we lose our perspective and we start letting today's events put us in the dumps because we've lost sight of a biblical hope. Don't get myopic, and don't let nearsightedness get you off of the promise and the hope that is in the promise of God. And don't let amnesia, forgetfulness, keep you from seeing the faithfulness of God throughout the story of your life that has brought you up to this point. You beat myopia by looking to the future promises of God, anchoring your life in them. You beat amnesia by looking back on the faithfulness of God and letting gratitude for His goodness to your life rise up inside you. Because gratitude will build more hope, and hope is what sustains you. Thanks for digging into this. I hope you guys have great discussions tonight, because this is a powerful moment, I really believe, that calibrates and structures our entire lives. God bless.